Well, hello everybody and welcome to my show. My name is Jason DaCosta and this is Consistent Preterism. Thank you for joining me today. Hope you all are doing well out there. Today we're going to continue on in our series, 100 Reasons Why the New Testament is Only About the Salvation of Israel. And today we are on, audio number 8 in the series, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. And that is going to be taking a look at a very famous Galatians chapter 4 passage, which is Paul writing to the elect Israelites living in Galatia and the regions thereabout. And we're going to take a look at that. The last couple of audios that we did in this series, we looked at Romans chapter 1, and we looked specifically at the concept of individuals who knew God, then falling away from God and being condemned and guilty for it. And really, if you think about it, that's the whole story in a nutshell, right? That there's no chance that this story says anything else. The story shows very clearly that without law to impute sin, there is no imputation of sin. So naturally, those who were given the law would be the ones in context who needed salvation from the condemnation that they were under. And so we showed in Romans 1 how these ones knew God and they knew, the penalties and stuff that were deserving of certain acts, and yet they still practiced them and they were without excuse and they were guilty. We showed how God gave these individuals up to their vile passions. And that matches what Stephen says in Acts chapter 7 when he recounts Israel's history and says that, due to their wickedness, God actually gave them up to these passions and these lusts. So the words of Stephen in Acts 7 match the words of Paul in Romans 1 precisely. And if we look at who's being spoken of in Acts 7, it's only Israel. It's Israel's history. Goes right through it, from the patriarchs right on down. So we showed a lot there in the Romans 1 stuff. We're going to come back to Romans, obviously, because there's tons of tender, juicy nuggets in that book. And a lot of things that have been butchered and misapplied and misunderstood. And we're going to, obviously have more content as we progress in this series. But I like to bounce around. I like to do that so that you see the connections and things kind of stay fresh in your head, right? We just got done with Romans. We showed how these individuals had the law. They violated it. They walked away from it. They were guilty of it. They were in trespass of it. And now we're going to look at Paul's letter and see if it matches that sentiment in Galatians. And so Paul in Galatians chapter 4, let's take a quick gander at it, a ganderooski. Paul says in Galatians 4 verse 4, "But when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his Son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those who were under the law, that we might receive adoption as sons." Okay, so God sent forth Jesus, born of a woman, right? Born under the law to redeem those who were under that law. So he was born into the law to redeem those under the law. Now, obviously, we know that's the Torah, right? He was born into that law to redeem those under it. And notice that Paul says that when the fullness of time had come, right? Look at how Paul uses that term fullness, right? No one would argue that Paul isn't trying to convey a message of, the completion of the time and focus, the fullness of time. In other words, when all that time ran out and they were at the end, that's when God sent forth his Son. Well, compare that to Romans 11 fullness, when the fullness of the nations come in. Well, again, that means when the full number of the ones in the nations came in, right? That's exactly what it means. It means the same thing that Paul meant here in Galatians 4:4. But the point to really take notice of is that Galatians chapter 4 is basically saying here that Jesus was born into the law to redeem those under it. Well, did everybody have that law? No, absolutely not. Only a specific chosen people did. And so did Jesus die for everybody, or did he die for a specific chosen people? That's a question that we need to ask. And that question and that answer is directly related to the fact that only Israel had that law. Now, As you know, if you follow along, you know I've been critiquing some of Dr. Richard Carrier's most pitiful article that he presented against I.O. recently. And one of the things that struck me was how ignorant this guy is of the foundational principles of this story. He is extremely ignorant of them. Either that or he just doesn't understand them. But if you look at the foundational principles of this story, you can see where the law begins. You can see its inception. You can see its early beginnings, its microcosms. You can see how it grew to where it eventually got. But what's important to notice is where Moses sort of outlines this, formal agreement called the covenant, and where he outlines the law and what he says about that law. Well, this is in the very beginning of Israel's history. And Moses is telling the people of Israel as they were gathered before him, and he was telling the people of Israel that this covenant that God was making with them was to be cherished, was to be carefully handled. They were not to ignore these laws and commandments. Moses goes on in Deuteronomy 4 and places around there, all the way actually through the book of Deuteronomy, and keeps warning them that, listen, you've been given an amazing responsibility, something very unique. You are a chosen people, loved above all, he says. What other nation has their God so close to them as the Lord our God is to us, said Moses. In other words, no other nation had that relationship with this God. They were the chosen ones. They were his portion, his inheritance, his special chosen people, the apple of his eye. Okay, so you can honestly understand and easily see that saying that the salvation, the ones in heaven at the end who were redeemed and gathered in, to say and claim that they were Israel is not that far-fetched because of all these titles that Israel is given throughout the tale. It just makes more sense that these ones who were specially loved and chosen and called a jewel and an emerald and all these precious jewel names was actually Israel. I mean, how far-fetched is that to imagine? It shouldn't be very. But looking at what Carrier says, more importantly what he doesn't say about the Israelites and their foundation and where what Moses said to them at the beginning, it's really amazing that he doesn't say anything about it. Right? I mean, this is the whole point of the story, the beginning, when the covenant was really kind of established with the people, and they were made known that this is unique. Not everybody has this. You're the only ones that have this. And then Moses goes into this whole discourse about blessings and curses. And curses. Pick up on that word, curses. Okay, so when we see that at the end, the curse is removed and there shall be no more curse, like Revelation says, that's simply related to the law, because Jesus was the end of the law to those who believe. He died for those under the law. He was born into that law to redeem those under that law. Okay? And so he fulfilled the law and the prophets. All right? And what we have here is we have Moses basically laying the foundation and helping us to understand what's going on at the end. Right? I mean, imagine being told in the beginning, your ancestors being told that they need to cherish the law. Otherwise, they and their descendants would be cursed. And then you see this trajectory throughout the story that shows Israel repeatedly, scattered into the nations, punished, taken into exile, cursed. Okay? Their enemies ruling over them. You see comebacks throughout, of course, because God always saved his people. He brought them back to the land in the Second Temple era, and all these, glorious returns and whatnot. But that's the theme. That's the motif. That's the pattern. So to think that the New Testament is anything different than that is absurd. Right? It's absurd. So we have that trajectory set up. We understand why Jesus needed to come for certain individuals, because they were cursed. They were dead. They had violated so many laws, so many commandments. Look at what Paul tells the Colossians, and I won't get too far into it because it's going to be another point in this series, but he tells them, You're dead in the trespass of being uncircumcised in the flesh of your foreskin. Well, nobody else had that commandment besides Israel. God wasn't commanding pagan nations to be circumcised. But here Paul is telling these individuals in Colossae that they were once dead in the trespass of not being snipped in the Wiener Schnitzel. They were trespassing a covenant commandment, that being to circumcise. And so he tells them they were dead, but Christ had nailed that commandment to the cross. So you can easily see that Jesus died for those under the law. He died for those who were violating the law in whatever capacity that was, whether they were living as pagans out in far out regions or they were close to home. It didn't matter. He died for the sheep near and far. And so Galatians 4:4 is an absolute doozy. It says that he was born into the law to redeem those under the law. That's clearly only Israel. When you look at Carrier's pathetic points, one of the things he says is that just because it says he died for those under the law, he used Hebrews 9:15 as his example, doesn't mean that he didn't die for everybody else either, right? It's a silly argument, and it shouldn't even be made, because he said he only came for Israel. The only ones in heaven at the end are the 12 tribes. Paul said all Israel being saved was the goal. So there's plenty of evidence to show that this was in fact only about Israel and those under the covenant curse. And we know Paul said in places like Romans 3 that the law says whatever it says to those who are under it, that all the world may become guilty before God. So he defines who the world was. He says it was those under the law. The law says what it says to those who are under it. Not to the whole world, to those who are under it. Exclusive group. But he defines that group as all the world, becoming guilty before God. So folks, Galatians 4:4 is another doozy, another chokehold for the IO viewpoint, the AIO viewpoint. And I'm sure you can all see that. I hope you enjoyed it, folks. If you did, give it a like, a Rooski. If not, you know what to do. And we'll catch you on that flip side. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.